like to use that word because it just kind of feels like, I don't know, it taints the work that I do, and it's more of a responsibility that we carry. But I've been honored, to work on the international level as well, and I've been blessed to meet so many different women, Indigenous women from different tribes, via the United Nations Global Indigenous Women's Caucus. And through that work, I've done a lot of advocacy work in violence against Indigenous women. So I'm very honored to co-present along Elsie here. I know my name isn't in the program, and there's a good explanation for that. I believe Ms. Teresa Edwards wasn't able to make it at the last minute, and so Tia so graciously asked me if I would fill in to support our sister Elsie here today.
And things work out the way they need to, and I don't believe there's a mistake in any of this, right? So I'm really, really grateful to have met you and to be in this space and share this space together. So I live in Alaska, right? And in our traditional way, if we could ask, usually what we do is we ask people of this land if we have permission to speak. And
so I invited our Hashma sister, Angela, here, if you would stand up for a moment, please, to come in. And if you notice, we smoked you guys off this morning. I asked her to be present with the medicine from this territory because the subject that we're going to be talking about is very heavy, and it's really hard for a lot of us to kind of find a balance again. And so she so graciously was very, sorry, I'm losing my words here. She was very gracious in being present and providing that for all of us. And so I'd like to thank our sister Angela for being present here from this territory to support us in that way and allow us to use the medicine from this territory. I know we all have our own medicines from where we're from, but being that we're in this territory talking about this subject, I figured, it'd be best to ask the people here to help us with their medicine. So this morning we smoked you off, and when we're done with our session, we will have the medicine available again should you need it. So Angela, thank you so much for being here.
And Angela, do we have your permission to continue speaking on your land? Thank you. And I also smudged you with some sage that I recently received from Lakota country in South Dakota. They gave me this beautiful abalone and some sage as a way to pray in the continued work that we're doing. So in our Yupik way, it's really, really important not only to honor the land of the people that we stand on, but even flying in, we ask permission, can we continue to do the work that we're doing? And all of what we've been talking about the last few days have really, really, I know our ancestors, their ears are wide open, their hearts are open, right? And it's beautiful to have children here, young people here, to be able to take this in, because all of this is medicine. And what I believe, and I truly believe, anytime that we come into contact and share and speak from our heart, what we're doing is we're entering into sacred ground, right? And so what we're doing in this space together today, right now, is we're creating a sacred place, right? And so with that in mind, I always want to ask, if I offend anyone, I ask for forgiveness ahead of time, because that's not my intention, right? And so, and I want to take a few moments just to honor all those many, many people. And in many ways, our ancestors, I always feel so humble when I speak, because the story I share, while it's not, many, many people share this story. I feel like our ancestors, colonization that has happened, that occurred, that we are talking about while we've been here, right? Our ancestors, it's their story to tell, right? And I feel like I never do it justice. I do the best I can, but I never do it justice. And so with that, I like to just take a few moments, if we would just remember, and you can, if, because we are talking about sexual abuse, sexual assault, right? If you would take a moment, just to quiet yourself, to calm yourself, to allow yourself to be present, right? And think of the strength of our ancestors. Allow that strength to come into this space. That resiliency, that hope that we all carry, right? And the hope that we have for our grandchildren, for 7 generations, that their world will be better, will be different because of all of what we're doing, right? So we'll just take a moment. Just a moment of silence. So what we're going to do, for those of you that just came in, Yupbiuwa, and I have to say I'm a proud Yupik woman, and I am wearing a kasbuk. It's a traditional attire, right? And there used to be a time in my life when I was not okay wearing a kasbuk, even though as a child, that's what I wore all the time, right? But it signified that I was Yupik, right? And there was a time in my life when it was not okay to be Yupik, right? But before I get started, I need to tell you that I am the youngest daughter of the late Edgar and Teresa Francis of St. Mary's. I'm the youngest of 7. I have a sister that's 17 years older than I am. And I'm also the granddaughter of the late Alfred and Nastasia Francis of Pilot Station, and the granddaughter of George and Aguirre Peterson of Old Andrzejewski. And I'm married, and we have 3 children, and we have grandchildren together. And for the past 6 years, I worked at a child advocacy center in Anchorage, and I worked with children that were sexually abused and seriously physically abused. And we created what we call a Native advocacy team to work with the Alaska Native families that came through the program. And we saw about 900 children in Anchorage that were representative of children mostly in that area, but from all over the state. 900 children a year. And of the 900, about 45% consistently were Alaska Native. And when we look at the child welfare system, the number of children that are in state custody and in placement, it's easily 45 to 59% are Alaska Native. Even though Alaska Native children between the ages of 18 and under comprise about 18% of the population. So, and recently I have founded a nonprofit, Arctic Winds Healing Winds. And my son actually came up with that name. So we're from the Arctic, and when we speak, we create wind. When we speak the truth, we heal. And the vision behind that is that those who lead with a healing heart will change the world. And I believe in my process, I have to say when I introduce myself that I am Yupik. I'm a proud Yupik woman. I'm also a social worker. I have a degree in social work. And I have to say I'm also a survivor of clergy sexual abuse, right? And I'm a mom, I'm a grandma, right? So those who lead with a healing heart will change the world. And it is that in my process of healing, getting to the place where I could actually speak of what happened to me in a way that allows me to stand tall, right? Of integrating not only the abuses, but the strengths, the resiliency, and integrating the two of them, right? It's almost like the challenge of integrating being Yupik and being a professional social worker. Like, how does that work, right? Being, I mean, you have to integrate both, right? I'm not just a social worker, I'm a Yupik social worker. I come from that lens, right? And so I'm very, very much honored to be here today to share. And what we're going to do, we're going to share a little bit about the resiliency of Alaska Native, and we'll go a little bit into historical trauma. Not so much like we can spend a lot of time in doing our own research in terms of the history, and each history is different, right? And it's important to know your own history and where you come from, right? And the people that you serve, and the challenges that they went through, the traumas that they went through, right? And we can spend a lot of time doing that, but I don't want to spend our precious time together, our sacred time together doing that, right? So we'll speak about it, but we won't focus on that. So we'll go a little bit into that, and then we have a film, a short film, a 30-minute film actually, and I'll explain that in a little bit, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Right? Anything else to add? Okay. So as you will see in the film, the name of the film is called The Silence, and it was produced in 2011 by PBS Frontline. And it shares the story of individuals from a village in Alaska called St. Michael, not St. Mary's, okay, but we're both Catholic villages. And so I, along with the people in the film and the over 300 survivors of clergy sexual abuse alone in Alaska, we come from a long line of proud Yupik people, right? Proud Yupik people. And I've heard that throughout this conference, right? Proud Hopi, proud Mari, right? Like, we are a proud people of Indigenous, of the land that we come from, right? And we have very similar ways of being in this world, being interconnected with the land, the animals, each other, the universe, right? Those laws, the laws of the universe, are universal to Indigenous people. And it's beautiful to be part of this process and to hear that. And to hear it in different languages, right? It's almost like, and I was telling Lisa, a friend, I want to acknowledge another Alaskan in the room, Lisa, who's Haida, from Southeast Alaska, Heidelberg. And I was explaining to her, that we're all, it's almost like we're saying the same thing, and yet in our own languages, right? And it's beautiful. And it's amazing how, to me, being from the north, being Yupik Eskimo, and another Alaskan, how could I forget? Beth! You're sitting there so quietly. I'm so sorry. Right? Oh my goodness. And you want to show everybody your beautiful muklaks? Your slippers? So I'm so sorry. So, and I forgot my train of thought. So we're basically of this land, and we have very, very similar teachings. And in the Yupik way, we call them words to live by. And they were teachings as to what it meant to be a good relative, to live in peace. And I liked, I think it was Chris that mentioned what it means to be a leader. It was a peacemaker, right? And as Yupik people living close to the land, and we were, if you know anything about Alaska, there's different cultures in Alaska. The Yupik people are more up north, and so if there's certain features were shorter, usually, typically, than other Alaska Native people. The Athabascan are typically taller, and the Tlingit and Haida are typically taller. And I was told it was because we adapted to the cold. We had to be close to the land for shelter, right? So our food, the clothing, right, is all adapted to the land that we live on. And that's true for all Indigenous people, right? So, but the words that our ancestors, the people that shared, they had teachings as to what it meant to be a good human being. And they taught children from a very young age. And women were taught when they were pregnant, to be mindful of their pregnancy, to talk to their baby, right? Because it was even in the womb, right, the teachings began, right? And so, so there were very many teachings, admonitions they called them, as to what it meant to live a peaceful life. And according to this book is like my Bible, right? This is wise words of the Yupik people. We talk to you because we love you, right? And it's by an anthropologist that spent a lot of time in one of the Yupik villages, and she learned how to speak Yupik. So, and there was they had elder and youth conferences where she captured the words of the elders and created books from that, right? And so, so there were admonitions or teachings as to how, you do not yell at children. You discipline out of love, right? And there was an understanding that there was a relationship between parents and children that was unique to any other relationship. And so children received instruction in a loving way. And one of the things that they talk about is when children are upset, right? You don't keep disciplining them when they're upset because they cannot hear it, right? You talk to them when they're when they're happy. And so there's and compassion and respect lay the foundation for that teaching, right? Children were taught, when we put our bilukuks, the maklaks on to go play outside, as they're putting them on, they were told to be kind, to be compassionate, to be kind. Those are fundamental teachings as to what it meant to be a good human being. And there were ceremonies and things, activities that relayed that message, that foundation, right? And so, like many Indigenous people of the land, we lived in peace for hundreds and thousands of years, living off the land. And so, like one of the admonitions, they said, particularly for men, for boys, don't hit boys in the face. So specific things like that. And they would say, so it's because hunting and survival was so key, right? When the boys go out and hunt, if they're slapped in the face as little kids, it'll feel like the world is slapping them when they face the elements of the weather, right? And so there are many, many teachings like that are so powerful, it's like hearing it in Yupik is one thing. So I bring those up only because it's really important to lay the foundation of strength, right? And so we know all too much the realities of colonization and what that has done, right? Do you want to share a little bit about your culture and the strengths in your culture?
Elsie, for that. I just wanted to fill in a little bit. This topic that we're talking about isn't something that is isolated to one people's, or even to just women. So if I can, with your permission, ask if you yourself or if you know someone who has been a victim of sexual assault or sexual abuse, can you raise your hand? I think almost everybody in the room raised their hand. If the person who is a perpetrator is somebody that was known by the victim, can you raise your hand? So this is something that's really common, and it's something that I think us as Indigenous peoples try to figure out a way how to balance our self-determination with justice. And when it's in your community and your community members or somebody that's in your home, it causes a lot of division, and it causes a lot of fights. It causes a lot of those things that are associated with being a victim: guilt, shame, regret. All of these things not just are felt by the person who did this to the people, but also the people who were the victims, but even more so, the community members that are affected by it because they are in the presence of it. And so it's something that's really difficult. It's easy for us to go out and to seek justice, and it's not easy for everybody. I don't mean that as a general statement, but however we find that justice, whether it's through traditional means or through the society we live in by the court systems or the police systems, it's a difficult thing for us as Indigenous people to have to make those decisions, because many times they're our own people. And so with that being said, when talking with Elsie about how we were going to approach the topic, I told her I really wanted to focus on the healing part of these issues, because we can advocate and we can seek out justice, but not all of us will get that. Not everybody who's been a victim will get justice, but all of us can get healing. Not just those of us that are victims, but those of us who are affected by the reality of this terrible, terrible act of violence. And it is an act of violence, a violence against our own people that was brought by the colonizers. So in my community, we try to focus on healing, but in practicing our self-determination, we've come up with something we call the Topi Chimaleke, which is the shield of the children. And it's a protocol that our people and our council have put together to address an accusation. And it's not nothing new. For our people, it's very important because so much of our culture and our languages and our traditions were lost. And we're rebuilding all of those things. And this just is something that there wasn't history of how to deal with this for us to look at. It wasn't written in our codices. It wasn't written or given to us in oral tradition on how to deal with it. And so we do our best to try and assert our self-determination in figuring out how we're going to deal with it. And so there's steps that we put in place, a protocol, if you will, when there's an accusation, what has to happen, how do we deal with it from then on. But it didn't come as easy. It doesn't come, it comes with a price. Because of the conflict, because of the division, we had elders that were split. We've had parents and mothers who wanted to believe the children involved on both sides. And then you had friends of the families that didn't know what to do, because if you say you don't believe somebody on this side, then you're calling this person a liar. And it's hard, our words hurt more than sometimes the actions that happen. And so it's in my community, we try really hard to find a way to balance that. And most of the time, we focus on justice and not so much on the healing. And so when I met Elsie and I saw her film, I can't begin to tell you how much I saw her as a warrior and a hero, in my eyes, for her people, for people who have suffered this violent act. And the amount of courage that she's had to come forward and to hit this straight on, it's not easy. It's not an easy thing to have to deal with. And so I mean, we'll see the film and you will understand a little bit more, but I really want to focus on the healing part. We know the other side of it. We know the violence, we know the sadness, we know the trauma that comes with it, but we don't always know the healing. And maybe within this room we'll find that within each other, because it's not something that is very easily understood. Sometimes it's harder for us to find that than it is for us to find that justice. It's harder because while the justice system may do its part, it doesn't take away that trauma or those experiences or the pains or the triggers that you carry with you, that everyone who's affected by it carries it with them. And it's very difficult to talk about. It's very difficult to express without so much baggage following along with it. So that was what I wanted to share about how we're trying to address this. And I'm very excited to go home and share this new, for me it's something new to focus on, the healing part. And that's where I want to go with it. And I can't be, there's no words to express how grateful I am that I ended up here, that I ended up being asked to participate here. Otherwise, I'd be in the other room helping with the translation equipment. To be honest, I really would. But everything happens for a reason, like Elsie said, and there was a reason why I was able to meet her and to hear her story. And it just gave me this renewed hope on what I need to do when I go back home. And I hope you all find that as well. Thank you.
So I like what you said. There is hope for healing, and everyone has a right to healing. And it is through this process of finding my voice as a survivor that I want to share that hope with other people. That's my motivation, right? Because I know what it's like. So I speak both from a victim and a survivor standpoint, right? And a professional standpoint, and a UPIC standpoint. So, but for me, I had to relearn or reshift what it meant to be human, what it meant to be UPIC, as a result of the sexual abuse that I went through as a child. And it was with a Catholic priest, and I was 10, and it stopped when I was 19 years old. His name was Father Poole, and he was a friend of our family. He lived in St. Mary's. He was a superior of the Catholic Church in St. Mary's before I was even born. And in my process of coming forward, I have learned that the Catholic Church knew long before I was born that he had problems with young girls, but they kept him there, and then they just transferred him to a different state, and then brought him back to Alaska. But he always would say, and there is a process of grooming, and I remember the very first time it happened, and I was a young girl, I was 10, and I was playing outside with some other girls, and he called us into his little study, and he had us line up against the wall, and he had us answer questions, right? And at the end, he said, he told the other girls they could leave, but he told me to stay. And he said to me, "You are so much more mature than them." And that's when it started. And during that time, it was mainly during the summers when I would go to Nome to babysit. So I lived in St. Mary's, but the abuse occurred in Nome, where my sister had children, my sister that's 17 years older than I. And he would always say, "When you go to college, I will go for your 19th birthday. Wherever you go, I will go." And he did. I went to college in Helena, Montana. I went to Catholic high school. I went to Catholic college. When I was growing up, I always felt I was like, I identified as a Catholic more than I identified as a Yupik. Like my Catholic identity, that was my world, that I was Catholic, right? So he came to my freshman, when I turned 19, he came to Montana, and he said Mass in my room, my dorm room. And it was, there happened to be a lady that I knew that lived in Helena that he also knew, and we went to dinner at her place. And it was then that I wrote a letter to him, and I said, "I don't ever want to be alone with you again." And after that, I never was. And I think about that. And I think about that, and I think that's where my healing began. But I also had to shift my mind from thinking, because he would tell me, "You are my father," or he was my father, he was my brother, he was my friend, and he was my lover, right? And I had to reshift my worldview from looking at him in that way to looking at him in a different way. And where does that fit in my psyche? Where does that fit? And I had to see that he used that relationship to satisfy his own needs. It wasn't about me. And years later, when I sat in a deposition with him, he justified what he did by saying it was his role to teach me how to love. That's how he justified it. And working in the world of the Child Advocacy Center, that child advocacy world, perpetrators have a justification as to why they do things, right? And they'll say it's because I was, in my situation, I was teaching her how to love. They have to justify it in their own mind. But I had to adapt to a world where I was no longer, I embrace the Catholic religion, right? And there was a lot of grief that went into that. And because I identified as Catholic, it was my sense of spirituality. And if we look back, when we talk about historical trauma, and we talk about colonization and the missionaries and the Yupik people, we had shamans, right, in our area. They were the connection to the spirit world. And when there were great sicknesses, so I'll mention a little bit about what we call Harold Napoleon, a Yupik from Hooper Bay, wrote a book called Yuyuhak, The Way of the Human Being, and he talked in that book about the Great Death and how during that time there were many, many people that died. So in some situations, whole villages of people died. And what people did during that time, because it was so painful, the shamans could not be relied upon to cure the sicknesses that people were dying from, right? And it was during that time that the missionaries came in. They had a very deliberate meeting in Sitka and divided the state up by churches, right? And it just so happened my area became Catholic. And so the people at the time had to believe in something, and it was so painful to talk about the deaths, right? They weren't allowed time to grieve, right? And so what happened was people were silent. And what we know when that happens is that it turns into shame, right? It became, with the shamans, our people believed that they had offended the spirit world. That was their reasoning as to why many people were dying. They offended the spirit world. And so when the missionaries came proclaiming salvation, they embraced that, right? And so, and that shame. So when I talk about shame, and Brené Brown does a beautiful job of that, she talks about, so shame is different than guilt. Okay, so when we talk about, all the statistics, this is the site, this is what happens, right? And so guilt is, I didn't mention you first as being Alaskan, darn, I regret that, and I know I can do better next, you can talk every day we have regrets, but shame is different. Shame is crippling. What shame does is it holds your soul, right? What it says is there's something wrong with me. And I believe we as Native people, through this process of colonization, and it's different for every region, every people, Indigenous people, but collectively there's been this idea that there's something wrong with us. We're less than, right? So I'm just aware of the time. It's already, what? Oh my word. Okay, so we're going to start the film. Yeah, so getting to the place where I had to accept that I was an abuse victim, and also that I had strengths. So moving into that and integrating both. And I went through a process, and I sued the Catholic Church. And after the lawsuit, I worked with the attorneys that represented me. And in that process, I worked with over 300 survivors of clergy sexual abuse alone in Alaska. And we also worked with survivors in South Dakota and Montana. And this film is based on the work in Alaska. Is it ready?
Larry's making things happen.
And the film is a half an hour long. It's already 11:30, and we're going until 12. And usually I don't want to just end with the film because it's important to know to take care of yourselves as you're watching this, because it can be hard to watch. Okay, and so. Okay, are we ready?
He's taking it away. Far beyond my capabilities.
How are you guys doing so far? All right, you guys okay? All right, so we might want to just watch.
Yeah, I was going to ask Elsie if she could share what she shared with me when she sent me the video. If you can because I really think that's important.
So it's really important, okay, because what you're about to watch, it's almost like you need to be gentle with yourself as you're watching this, okay? Because what this, while this is about Alaska, it's representative of so many of the people that we've worked with, that we love, so it's really, really important to take care of yourself and to honor yourself, be gentle with yourself, and allow yourself to take care of yourself in this space, right? And if you need to step out, have permission to just take care of yourself. What else did I say?
That was it.
Okay.
That was it. And it's important. I didn't understand what she meant when she said that. I thought she was saying like, oh, take care of yourself, I'll see you later, kind of a thing. And after, when I saw the video, I realized what she meant. So I think.
So the film is a half an hour long, and it's 11:30. So maybe what we'll do, we'll watch about 20 minutes of it, and I can go into a little bit about how it ends, and you can maybe see the whole film on your own, because I want to leave time for questions. It's really important that we just don't end with this, okay? We want to start and end in a good way.
Additional funding for Frontlines
So you'll want to go ahead.
is provided by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Yeah.
Shoshone Tribes.
Okay,
I've been
just go
writing
back
about
a,
Native Americans
go back
my
just a
whole
little bit.
career.
A little bit. Tiny bit. There. Perfect.
This is a story that's been shrouded in secrecy for years. It takes place in an isolated part of Alaska, 200 miles south of the Arctic Circle. The village is called St. Michael, and it's home to some 360 Alaska Native people. As a journalist and as a member of the Shoshone tribes, I've been writing about Native Americans my whole career. But little could prepare me for what happened in St. Michael. Many here still remember how innocently it all began.
Growing up, there's so many good memories. The thing I enjoyed the most was the community gathering. The community being together as one and having fun. It was good to see people happy.
My grandpa taught me how to hunt and fish. I used to love to go out with him, go fishing, hunting and trapping.
My earliest memories was people who were very devoted Catholics. We went catechism right after school. We ran straight across to the church. We were right next to the Catholic church from the old school.
The church in St. Michael was built in the early decades of the 20th century as missionaries helped spread Catholicism across Native Alaska.
Before the white man came, the Eskimos believed that everything had a spirit. We respected everybody, and we knew that there was somebody up there taking care of us. Now, almost everybody here is Catholic.
To run the parish in St. Michael, the church sent Father George Endall. One of the state's pioneer priests, Endall moved from church to church throughout Alaska before landing in St. Michael in 1968. He brought with him a church volunteer named Joseph Landowski, who he'd given a job to years earlier.
We don't know a lot about him. He's somewhat of a mystery. Endall brought him in as a sort of a novice master at the school. He was, we were told, placed in charge of the boys' dormitory.
In St. Michael, Landowski would train to become a deacon, but the people here looked up to him as a priest all along.
He had a really nice singing voice. His voice was very nice at saying prayers. At the time I worked as altar boy too with him. I always wanted to be a deacon as a kid.
In the beginning, yeah, I wanted to go to catechism. It was fun until weird things started happening.
After Mass, the parents would start leaving, going home, and Landowski would pull out checkers or chess or card games.
He'd offer us money or drinks or candy or something we wanted to do anything to get us into church.
I was age 12. When he asked me to go in the bedroom with him, I was asking him what for, and he said I would find out, so I followed him in. I was kind of afraid though, because when he shut the door and locked it, you know, he'd pull my pants down, he'd take his clothes piece off, put them on a dresser.
I was just a kid, didn't know nothing. Father Endall and Joseph Endall, we couldn't stop molesting when they started. It was almost an everyday thing. Father Endall was telling me that it would make me closer to God.
Father Endall and Joe Landowski moved through a series of Alaska villages, always in very remote parts of the state. always with no one there to supervise them except themselves. They were a law unto themselves, and they did whatever they wished.
There would be other abusers associated with the church in St. Michael. One seemed to favor exposing himself to girls.
When it first happened to me, I was 5. I can remember the day putting my head down when I saw him come out with no clothes, and I was scared. The next thing I remember, somebody was touching me on my arm. He would ask if we wanted to touch his private area, and he would say he would give us candy or give us a good prize.
This was 1970. It was absolutely unthinkable that the Catholic Church could be involved in the sexual abuse of children. There was nowhere for the kids to hide. There was no one they could talk to. The adults believed the abusers over their own children. It was a perfect storm for molestation.
He told us that if we told anybody, they wouldn't believe us because he worked for a church, he works for God. And he was right. Nobody would believe us.
I told my dad what happened in the church. I told him that guy touched me in my mouth and in my bottom. I remember my dad grabbing his belt. He hung me upside down. He beat me. He told me never to blame priests like that. My dad went out. He came back pretty drunk. I saw him holding a pistol in his hand. He looked at my mom and pointed the gun at her. The gun went off. My brother was in front, bullet pierced both of them. I held him in my arm. My brother didn't have to die just because I told my dad the truth.
The abuse in St. Michael would continue for 5 more years, as Ben and the others suffered almost daily molestation. Then, one day, in the summer of 1975, Joseph Landowski would finally be caught in the act.
My cousin Martha came. She saw what Joseph was doing, and she screamed and she said, "Oh, Ben, I'm gonna go tell, I'm gonna go tell." He went after her and tried to give her money or candy just to stop her from talking. She said, "No, leave me alone," and then she went running out.
As word spread, pressure mounted on Father Endall to act.
The police were not called. Even when there was an eyewitness to the abuse, the authorities were not called. The church handled it internally. Landowski was transported out of the town and left the state, and as far as we know, never returned.
But Father Endall stayed. Through it all, he remained revered and above suspicion. Although for 8 more years, he would continue to molest the boys and girls of St. Michael. Under Father Endall's watch, nearly 80% of the town's children, literally an entire generation, were molested.
The odds of being abused as a little Catholic boy or a little Catholic girl in that diocese was staggeringly high, higher than any other place in the United States that has ever been investigated to date.
There's a lot of people that will not acknowledge this pain. The hurts and the suffering here, you could tell in their eyes, they're trying to run away from it, but it's always there.
Ultimately, several dozen priests and church workers would be named as abusers. Not just in St. Michael, but in Alaska Native villages across the state. Few were as widely known at the time as Father James Poole. The host of a popular Catholic radio program, Poole was once profiled by People magazine as one of Alaska's hippest DJs. But decades later, he would be named as an abuser by almost 20 different girls and women. The first to step forward was Elsie Boudreau.
Father Poole would have me sit on his lap, straddling his legs, and we would French kiss for hours. He would tell me that he was my friend and that he was my brother, my father, and my lover.
Boudreau said the abuse lasted for almost 10 years. And on one occasion, she said, Poole raped her. Finally, she moved away and made a new life for herself in Anchorage.
Were you going to watch the game? Did he have it recorded?
She married and started a family. But then, she said, the memories of the abuse became inescapable.
When my daughter turned 10, the age that I was when the abuse began, it was really hard to shield the fact that I was sexually abused. It was like flooding my consciousness.
Boudreau turned to the Catholic Church for answers, but couldn't get anyone to talk to her. Finally, she got the attention of the new bishop, Donald Kettler, who'd just come from South Dakota to lead the Fairbanks Diocese.
I met Bishop Kettler. I identified that I was a sexual abuse victim of Father Poole's, and I just laid it all out and talked about how hurtful it had been to have come forward and to not get a response from anyone from the church, to not be acknowledged, not be validated, not be comforted, nothing. He didn't get it.
The Catholic Church abuse story was breaking around the country in 2002, and Boudreau decided to call a lawyer. Ken Rosa was a former Anchorage prosecutor who'd just begun to investigate abuse claims across Alaska.
Each time as we identified a new molester, it would open up a new group of victims because no victim wanted to be the first one to say something about a priest until they found out somebody else had made a complaint against their perpetrator, and then they would go, wow, I'm not the only one.
My name is Elsie Boudreau. My Yupik name is Boudreau.
Boudreau filed suit against the church, and then she decided to go public.
We ask that the church stop hindering the criminal and civil prosecution of men who have abused our children and the people who have covered up the crimes.
As the story unfolded, dozens more victims came forward. This time, Attorney Rosa filed a class action focused mostly on the abuse of Joseph Landowski in St. Michael.
It's pretty clear from the evidence that Landowski molested every male child he could get his hands on. He lived and breathed every moment of every day to molest boys.
The public spotlight now fell on Bishop Donald Kettler, who was forced to respond to claims about Landowski on the local news.
I was completely surprised. I did not know anything about this, or I didn't know who this gentleman was. All I can tell you, all that I know, is that he was listed as a volunteer in some of
The bishop first denied any church responsibility for Landowski. Then he said the church had no knowledge of his abuse.
There's nothing that we have found that would indicate that Landowski sexually abused any children. Nothing that we found.
But Ken Rosa turned up new information from the church's own files.
We looked at documents to prove to the church that Joe worked for them and extracted all of the evidence and then gave it back to them and said, now, tell me Joe Landowski didn't work for you.
In the end, the evidence proved undeniable. the claims against Joseph Landowski alone would grow to 112 victims. 26 more would come forward against Father Endall. And another 18 people would ultimately name Father Jim Poole. A number of these women claim Poole raped them, although in a deposition with victims' attorneys, Father Poole would say that he never raped anyone. By 2008, the church faced hundreds of claims and began talking about settling out of court. But little of this healed things for the victims in St. Michael. For years, Packy struggled with alcohol and drugs, and his own acts of domestic abuse led to 3 of his children being taken away by the state. Ben also has a history of domestic violence, sometimes landing him in jail, and he hasn't held a job in years. Alberta's never managed to talk about what happened. Even though the abuse ran deep through her family, it became a taboo subject. And it's the difficulty of breaking the silence that's bringing one of her fellow survivors to St. Michael. Elsie Boudreau is now trying to get people here talking.
My hope is that as Yupik people, that we can move beyond the shame and the guilt and have the strength of our ancestors to be able to sit in a circle with other survivors and to say, these things happened to me. And what are we going to do about it?
Boudreau arranged the first meeting of the St. Michael victims.
I'm honored to be here in St. Michael among all of you. And I know as survivors, it's often hard to come together as a group to face what happened to you. I'm curious about you, Alberta, and how it feels for you to be in this circle, being that this is your first time.
I was thinking of what people will say. We're doing it just for the money. They're lying. But it's not that. We were hurt as kids. They hurt us, and it can never be fixed.
I was very angry and upset because I started wondering how come I was crying. I really needed help, and I didn't know what was going on at the time. I did not know I was suffering PTSD. I still have nightmares of Joe Landowski molesting, having sex with me. I get up sweating, angry. Feel like I could hurt somebody, but I never meant to get angry on my children, but the anger went on my children also.
I know it's hard, Packy, and I'm sorry that all of that has happened to you and your kids.
I keep asking for help. Nobody's been listening to me for a long time.
Go ahead, Tommy.
Wasn't your fault. Wasn't your fault.
It's almost like a universal pain, and it runs very deep. If Jesus were to come to a village, I have no doubt in my mind that he would be crying. He would cry. You know, it's hard to see your own people hurting so much when you know that there's so much strength and beauty.
The only way that this thing is going to go away is people starting to forgive each other and forgive the Catholic Church.
For almost 8 years, the survivors in St. Michael have been waiting for an apology from Bishop Donald Kettler and the church.
As bishop, I express profound sadness